This episode is brought to you by Wild-Eyed Schemes. Look at you. You spend years plotting and planning your life-defining ambition. And when you finally get started, fast forward to a few months later, it was an overnight success. Oh no, you've become the proverbial dog that caught the car. Psychologists call this the success syndrome, the soul-damaging experience of achieving your goals only to face the pits of emptiness and depression. From a total victory in your Second World War, to the overthrow of the Tsar, to Bob Dylan's self-portrait album, many of your greatest disappointments will come after your dreams come true. Don't let that happen to you. Turn to Wild-Eyed Schemes for your emotional self-care. They are the world's #1 provisioner of plots that always appear eternally just beyond your grasp. How do they do it? With self-defeating prerequisites, diversionary side missions and pitfalls, hidden betrayals that make the gift that keeps on giving. The crazy conspiracy you get from Wild-Eyed Schemes will be enjoyed until the day you die, from your injuries, suddenly and unforeseen. Listen, we got this podcast from Wild-Eyed Schemes, and we couldn't be happier with it. So thank you, Wild-Eyed Schemes, for your sponsorship of the Rereading Wolfe podcast. This episode is brought to you by the support of generous listeners just like you. You can learn how to be one of them at patreon.com/rereadingwolfe. And thank you, listener patrons, for supporting the Rereading Wolfe podcast.
Warning. The following discussion is deliberately riddled with spoilers and unhinged speculation on this nearly 40-year-old book, Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun. You can't read a Gene Wolfe story. You can only reread a Gene Wolfe story.
Welcome to Rereading Wolfe. We don't pretend that this is the first time you and we have read these books. We want to understand them in as much detail as possible, and that means considering the works as a whole.
Hi, I'm James Wynn.
And I'm Craig Brewer.
Hello, Craig.
Good evening or morning, wherever you may be.
Well, hey, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Let's see. There's some news. There's a new chapter guide to Shadow of the Torturer.
That's right.
This one's by Matthew Chiarello. I'm taking a guess, Matthew. I don't know. I haven't got it yet myself, but I certainly will. Eventually, I read everything, and I always will. I always will.
Yep.
In the show notes, I put a link to it in Amazon. Well, what else? Cody Martin has in the past proposed that the body that Vodalus and Thea and Hildegren were exhuming in chapter 1 of Shadow is actually Thekla's, that Severian and the volunteers have entered some kind of time bubble that took them, just over a year ahead in time. Mm-hmm. And when Severian meets Vodalus in chapter 9 of Claw, it's been for Vodalus only a couple of weeks since that event. Now, I want to reiterate that the idea that the body was somehow Thekla's has always appealed to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it gives actually meaning to why they would be there, because otherwise we don't really.
Yeah. Why is Thea there?
Yep.
Sure. Yep. There are ways to get there without time displacement or with other timey-wiminess, but the point is I do like it. I do. But when we read the meeting with Vodalus, Severian's first meeting with him in chapter 9, the last episode, Craig, our conclusion was, well, we didn't think Cody's theory was beat. We just saw it as a disconfirmation of the theory. The theory was not helped. Well, Cody chimed in on Reddit to remind us Vodalus's comment when he meets Severian in the forest, quote, has it really been that long, does not, quote, invalidate his theory. He says, it's unlikely to be a comment on Severian's age, as he was already the size of a grown man, and a 16-year-old isn't too different in appearance from an 18-year-old. It could easily be an exclamation of surprise that Severian has gone from apprentice to traveling headsman in a matter of weeks. We also know from next chapter, that's the one in this episode, and much later in Citadel, that Hildegren has been tailing Severian and believes him to be someone of significance. Vodalus may suspect a ruse and is merely trying to shake Severian up by commenting on how unbelievable this suspected spy's change in vocation is. And he says, And we also learned in Citadel that the Alzabo has some side effects on a person's mind that causes them to hallucinate in similar ways to Severian's memory. If Vodalus has had enough of these Alzabo banquets, it's safe to say his mind is not unscathed. He may legitimately forget how long it's been. And we're going to have someone else with another theory about that coming up.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, it totally depends on... Yeah, I admit that comment is able to be read in many ways. Yeah,
as they all are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cody thinks it's enough to keep my pet theory afloat. And that's true enough, Cody. And I'm not lying that it seems to me that there is simply a structural probability, given the appearance of the corpse's hair and the clothes, the association with Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and the question of why Thea was along for the trip, to support the idea that something is up along these lines. Mm-hmm. And then let's see what else we got. I posted a reader interview with Sierra Reynolds this week. Yep. It's reader interview 11, if you're coming to this discussion much later. Sierra doesn't post a lot. She just lurks because, there's so many smart people who know so much. And then she alerted me to, first, that the word cacogin has an old everyday use to refer to an antisocial person. That was in Lexicon Earthus, but I never latched onto it as a potential everyday word. And I did some investigation inspired by our conversation, and I think the meaning is much stronger than she'd like to use it. It's not just a non-social person, but an antisocial person, as in antisocial behavior, like graffiti on your neighbor's garage door, or letting your dog poop in their St. Augustine lawn. But it's an old word, and there's a well-observed trend in strong terms being softened over time. So I think I can endorse her use of the term for someone who would prefer to forego an outing with friends and just stay home looking up the etymology of names in the Book of the New Sun. I'd certainly like to be a cacogin.
Well, now we know what my friends should have called me in high school. They would call up and ask me to do something, and I'd tell my mom to tell them I wasn't there because I was reading. And they found that out one time that I had done that for a long time, and they were not happy. But, yeah, introverts of the world unite. In silence and in
separately.
Right, yeah.
And speaking of names in the Book of the New Sun, Sierra noted that the name Jonas is very similar to the name Janus, the two-faced Roman god of doors with faces that point in opposite direction.
Yeah, this is cool.
Yeah,
this is really
Jonas departs through Father Ineri's mirrors, a two-faced door, if there ever was one, and as an android and a human, he literally has two faces.
Two faces, yep.
And then we were talking about parallels between Severian and Jonas. Well, there is a long tradition of supposition about the parallels between Jonas and Hathor, because like Clark Kent and Superman, like Bruce Wayne and Batman, Peter Parker and Spider-Man, Jonas and Hathor never seem to occupy the same place at the same time. At Piteous Gate, Jonas shows up and then Hathor ducks his head under his hat and soon disappears, seemingly. And in a soon upcoming chapter, Jonas and Severian will get attacked by noctuals, and then Jonas will make a hasty exit, and lo, here comes Hathor. And Jonas exits through mirrors, and Hathor has mirror sails that he uses to call up his menagerie horribles, his awful critters, and they are both sailors. And that's not all. Hathor is famously pining for his lost artificial girlfriend, his sex doll, who has violet eyes and hands like doves. Well, the name Jolenta, the woman Jonas pines for, and this is not in Lexicon Earthus, that name is associated with the name Iolantha, which means violet flower. And she's an artificial girl, if there ever was one. Like Rose in the Book of the Long Sun, probably more artificial than human. So the evidence associating Hathor with Severian is still strong, I think, but the evidence associating him with Jonas is as strong or even stronger. And we should end it here because I'm granting more confirmation to the everyone is Severian theory. And that has to stop.
Right. But that was such a cool thing. The more we started thinking about it, because I mean, even when she talked about it, it was a cool catch. But the more I think you and I looked into it separately, the more we kind of realized, oh, wow, that's really cool. So it was also really fun because she's like, yeah, I didn't want to say anything because everybody else does. And then as it was Witz or Stewart on Facebook said something like, I love it when people say that. They're like, yeah, everybody else seems so smart. And then they come out with this like thing that nobody has noticed in all the years of doing this. It's like, yeah, that's awesome.
Yes. And speaking of that sex doll, remember Neil Smith
Kneel at the cross.
Had a theory that Agilus was Hathor's sex doll. And that's why Hathor was hanging around outside the cell that night in chapter 30 of Shadow of the Torturer. That the face Severian saw when he first walked into the rag shop, the face of the mummified corpse, was not a mask. That the only mask was his mask of Agia's face. And Agilus was the sex doll, and Agia had appropriated him somehow, I guess. And I got to say that I'm thoroughly convinced that the mummified corpse face is Agilus's true face. It has to be. He wasn't wearing two masks. We only see him wearing one mask for the rest of the time until he's executed. And I guess no one bothered to look at the head after the execution. They just had the body dragged away by a mule. You know, it's pretty chaotic afterwards. So the only question in that case is, what is Agia doing with this resurrected corpse, and how did it die? And Severian has an instinct when they bring him to be executed that alluded to him being a soldier. But the belief that Agilus was the sex doll rather than the guy who stole the sex doll, that does draw the connection nicely. It would be a nice Wolfian misdirection.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, sex dolls. On Facebook, Mike Lejeune listened to the last episode and saw all those dead, perfectly preserved, naked, exhumed dead bodies and thought, Hathor sex doll. And my immediate, perfectly wholesome reaction was, gross, Mike. I can see that Mike and
until we realized other people were thinking the same thing.
Yeah, I can see that Mike and Hathor would get along great if they met at a party. But you came to his defense, Craig, and noted that we have already talked a lot more about sex dolls than we thought we would.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And now here we are. Just look at me. And when you said, well, you know, we're those kind of people who someone makes a joke and we sit there thinking, actually, and we all thought that was very funny. And I swear to heaven, within a half hour, I formulated a theory. I didn't plan to. It just came to me. And I'm going to do some mile-high theory stacking. So stand back a little. So you know how I see a lot of parallels between that sex doll and Thea. They both have violet eyes. Thea has a voice like doves. The Paracoida has hands like doves, even if she can't talk. Well, what else is a sex doll going to do? I mean, if it can't talk, it's probably going to use sign language, maybe. I've also recently proposed that the explanation for false Thecla's statement that Thecla is no more the real Thecla than she is, and that Severian thought he sensed the maid who played Holy Catherine in his room when he woke up after his elevation, and he smelled false Thecla's perfume, burning rose. So my proposition was that exaltants, at least the female ones, are all clones and born in pairs, twins, and one is randomly selected to be the exaltant who will grow to a massive height, and the other is, you know, what the spare or whatever. The exaltant's Kybit, who will donate her blood in service to the other, and, you know, who knows what else. So Hathor, obviously, from a long time ago, lost in the stars for centuries, maybe millennia. So suppose he stole the original Thecla's exaltant body, the original of all the clones. Maybe it was not even giant height, but it was preserved just like those bodies in the dump outside Solstice. And that's Hathor's sex doll. And that's why there are Thea associations. And you can even stack on top of that Neil Smith's theory that Agilus is the sex doll. It could tie it all together Well, I mean, it could tie a lot together. It doesn't explain Jonas and Jolenta. Every way I put this contraption together, I get a few pieces left on the floor. And that's what I got.
There's, a lot there that I think is connected. And I guess the thing that I want to stick with no matter what is that I do feel like whether it's the actual paraquoida or something else, Hether does have to, in my mind, Hether's got to be tied into other things in one big way or another. And the reason why I feel like the paraquoida thing is so promising is because that's what he gives as a motivation. Right. So once then you start to get the things about Agilus or Agia, I no longer feel like that's a huge stretch anymore to start making those connections, because otherwise Hether just seems like a random dude. Right. And,
but not so random.
But he's not supposed to be. Right. But everything about him seems way too significant and similar. So, Yeah. I mean, I don't, it still just in general feels a little too stretchy, but at the same time, it makes more sense than certain other things that seem like they ought to make sense. I mean, like otherwise, just who is this random paraquoida that he talks about?
You're right. Yeah.
So I'm not going to tell you you're wrong this time. And in that same vein, Stuart Ham mentioned on Facebook that when we did that episode last time and talked about the corpses and the cryogenic and the everything, it made him wonder whether there was some kind of connection between those corpses and the ones that we eventually see in Long Sun. The sleepers, right? Which that to me brings up all kinds of questions of, I assume they were clones, whether or not they're all clones of Typhon and his family. Probably.
I think the clones are all, if they're sleepers, of course we have, it's not really spoiling anything.
Yeah.
You have some embryos. Those are clones, I believe. We have the sleepers. Those are real people.
Those are full people, right? That's right. So those could be people, but either way, Stuart was wondering, well, is there a connection between those two things? And again, you just don't know whether, right? You don't know whether Wolfe was thinking that far ahead into Long Sun and what was going to go on there. But I don't know. There could well be some kind of connection there, that these are similar kinds of discarded plans that never got off the ground, literally. I don't know. But it's definitely something fun. We had to mention that because Stuart was very excited about it. He was a little mad when the thread got kind of pulled off course.
Take it over. Yeah.
Yeah. And connections between Long, Short, and New Sun are always iffy to me, just because I never know. I never have a good sense of how much connection to make there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. It's risky to try to explain this, but I don't even like using Earth and New Sun to explain a lot of this book. So let's see. On Twitter, Fred Kish thinks Severian's story is a deliberate wink at Gilbert and Sullivan's Mikado, and he cites the Behold the Lord High Executioner song. Some background: in Act 1, Coco is with the Lord High Executioner of Titipu, and he's been sentenced to death for flirting, and no one can be executed until Coco cuts off his own head. And in that song, he explains how he became the Lord High Executioner.
Taken from the county jail by a set of curious chances, liberated then on bail, on my own recognizances, wafted by a favouring gale, as one sometimes is in trances, to a height that few can scale, saved by long and weary dances, surely never had a male, under such like circumstances, so adventurous a tale, which may rank with most romances.
Well, there's certainly some overlap there. Check it out.
Yeah.
Brett Loftinus thinks the seamless gray stone of the Man-Apes Mountain is probably concrete. He says the juxtaposition of what is a ubiquitous modern material to us has become a relic of the ancient past in Severian's time. And that would be something that would appeal to Wolfe, I think, because the recipe for making concrete was lost for centuries. So thank you so much to everyone who has posted theories, some serious, some trivial, on the Rereading Wolfe subreddit. A borrowed mannequin proposed that the story of Holy Catherine could be not only associated with the legend of Saint Catherine of Alexandria, but also with Saint Dorothea of Alexandria and Hypatia, the pagan philosopher who was murdered by a mob of Christians in Alexandria. Really good. Also, Fulgen and Tonic proposed that the Vodalarii, as someone also has theorized, that they are addicted to and to some extent addled by their repeated use of Alzabo. And I can't say I disagree. I mean, I myself noted that Vodalus seemed to be using it the same way Charles Manson used it with the family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, Seminarian Imragulio posted a, quote, fun new theory that Severian might not be the true author of the Book of the New Sun, and another post that perhaps almost every named character is either an android, a chem, a robot, a time-traveling or time-displaced person, a clone, genetically modified animals, or alien human hybrid. And finally, we want to say thanks to Derek Varn and Patrick DeWind for supporting us on, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing DeWind right. It could be DeWind, right?
Could be. For
supporting us at the journeyman level. Also at the master level, thank you, Jonathan at Ringer. Ring on your bell. Stuart Ham. We just waiting for the hammer to fall. And T. Holder.
But you know it's Big T, homie, yeah.
And now, Craig, let's get a short lunch and have a meet and greet with Vodalus and Thea. But don't spoil your appetite, because the big meal is coming up in the following chapter in just 2 short weeks.
I ate long before because Chapter 10, Thea.
Okay, here we are.
I think you'll have something to say about this because you seem to be vaguely interested in Thea
Maybe
for various reasons. I'm not sure why.
Just a little bit. So we just to set things up. This is the day after Morwenna's execution, morning or noon after Severian fought the man-apes, and the day that Severian is supposed to execute Barnock, and it's 24 hours since this volume started. Severian met the Green Man yesterday. If Severian left the tower on Sunday afternoon, it's probably the following Saturday or Sunday morning. Severian and Jonas have been abducted this morning by Vodalarii and have been ferried to Vodalus's camp on a massive Megatherian, killing their abductors and the driver as they entered the camp, where Vodalus sits on his little throne conducting business in a glade.
I think that's the only time I've heard an elephant described as ferrying someone, but I like that.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Well, sure. Yeah, I guess, yeah.
It is, though.
What else ferries?
Boats, usually, but...
Well, you didn't mention it as being part of a boat. Oh, how about that?
True. That's true.
As being like a boat.
It was. That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, he's conducting business in a glade, and a glade is, Craig, it's one of those words that I know what is meant, even though I don't really know the dictionary definition of it. And it's just what you think of, open space surrounded by woods.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, after conducting some business, they are led by Vodalus along with around a dozen others for half a league to a table set among trees, set for brunch or lunch. A half a league is roughly as long as it takes to walk for half an hour. So they walk for around 30 minutes to get to this table. Severian sits at Vodalus's left, Vodalus on Severian's right. Severian pretends to eat. Remember, he ate breakfast at the end when they got back. Severian hasn't slept since this novel began, but he pretends to eat while he's actually, quote, feasting his eyes on Vodalus and his lady. Yeah.
So before we talk about her, the one thing about the setting that is interesting here is how, you mentioned glades, and we're going to get like another little glade later. And then of course the special, unique glade where the communion of a sort happens in the next chapter. But yeah, so we got this weird setting where it's the forest, but they treat this whole thing almost like this whole area of the forest almost like it's a kind of forest castle or fortress. Yeah, exactly. And there's little rooms and glades, and they lead Severian and Jonas in a little bit over to, you know, a little part by a creek where they can lay. But it also brings to mind a little bit how the tree that the Enoblos loves was also a kind of foliage area, right? That had spaces kind of carved out. Not identical by any means, but it's very much, it's sort of a motif, I guess, that I hadn't noticed before, but how there are places here that you don't realize are not necessarily artificial, but that are serving as like structures that you only kind of realize they're real structures after the fact. Like, I don't think that this is actually a fortress that's laid out or something. Like, they're just using parts of the forest is how I imagine it. But still, it's very odd how this is kind of similar to when we find out the House Absolute, that you don't necessarily know that you're in it, right? So there is a way that something about this area is kind of like a smaller version of the House Absolute, because it's just kind of out there, and it may not be the actual formal place itself, but you kind of wander into it, and then all of a sudden it's like, who knew I was in the, you know, the audience chamber or something, right, but I guess I was.
And look, it's the green room. So
yeah, but it just struck me this time how there's something about this book where there are things that you don't necessarily think of as buildings, like either a tree or a rocket ship or a part of the forest or what the House Absolute literally is, which become these sort of formalized spaces after you realize that you're there. And I think that's kind of cool. It's just something I hadn't really thought of Wolfe doing before, but it's a cool pattern. No idea if that means anything, but I just noticed it.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess we should talk about Thea.
Yeah.
So Saint Thea, it was from Gaza and Palestine, and she was arrested with some other Christians during the persecution of Christians under Emperor Maximian, who is a key player in the legend of Saint Catherine. And so when she denounced him for threatening to place her in a brothel, he had her scourged. Another Christian woman actually protested, and he eventually had them tortured, and he bound Thea and the woman Valentina together and had them burned to death. That's the story. Now, there is actually a god, Thea, also, and she is the consort of Hyperion, who is the father of Helios, the sun. So, I've already gone through all of that. I don't really know what else to say.
But I like the idea of she's not exactly the mother of the sun, but she's related to, but she's the consort of the father's son. So, right. Interesting. But we do have a sun connection then. But yeah, as far as the actual saint, I mean, my gut is that the name is probably there because of its similarity to Thecla's name. But Saint Thea, I'm trying to think other than, because the story that you have, I mean, she calls someone out, but for the most part, she's sort of more there as a martyr, right? So, right is what it sounds like from the story. So, yeah. So still not a whole lot, man.
There's nothing directly, but I got to tell you the truth. If I was going to guess, here's my personal curiositas earthis about the development of these names.
Okay.
Curiositas earthis.
I think that Thea came first because of her association with the Catherine legend, because she's associated with the same emperor. Mm-hmm. Or maybe, well, I have to believe that the association with the sun was real. And I think that Wolfe went looking for a saint, a female saint, whose name brought to mind the thorn. And I think he didn't find one. And so I think he thought, oh, well, Thecla, the claw, it could be named the claw. And that's how we got the claw.
It would be so cool if we could actually get drafts that showed up. We talked about this last time or a couple times ago. That would be so awesome if we could actually see some of this stuff. Yeah. Even if it just made more of a labyrinth, like it would still just be so fun to be able to tell.
Yeah. Well, I'm very well aware in this particular chapter that what I'm doing is just the same sort of just so naming explanation that Thea wrongly applies. So, but we'll get to that. So I guess Thea is on the other side of Vodalus, on his right at the table. And Severian says of Thea, quote, whom I had so often recalled as I lay on my cot among the apprentices in our tower. In this case, he's talking about recalling both Vodalus and Thea.
And that phrasing, too, is fun because it's not just remembering Vodalus. He's actually talking about remembering her, which if, like you said, if Thea was the first love for Severian, then that phrasing seems a little more pointed than just, I would remember her and Vodalus and the whole night of the... Yeah.
Now, Severian was a kid when he met Vodalus, and Severian says that when you're a kid, all grown men look tall unless they're very short. And it's an issue of authority. So he had no real understanding of how tall Vodalus was. And now he can see that he's maybe a little taller than Thecla and Thea, and that Thea is about the same height as Thecla. And this is the first time we are flatly told that, like Olton, Vodalus and Thea are exaltants, like Thecla. We could have made that assumption, I suppose, about Thea. He says they aren't, quote, merely armigers like Sir Raucho. And this is the third reference we've made to Raucho. So if you want to build theories around him, you have every good reason.
Yeah. And it surprised me again this time when I was rereading for us to talk, because I was like, this dude, like, why is he here again? But yeah, he is the one, which I remember too, just thinking about how it was first published. This is a second volume. He hasn't mentioned Raucho except someone in a book that you would have maybe read last year. So to bring him up here, I mean, yes, Wolfe was writing them all at the same time and he had easy access to look back and whatnot. But still, doing that by knowing that you're going to mention something that was in a previous book that was already a very small character, it either has to be important or it has to be there intentionally to throw you off or something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. I mean, he could have used Valeria as an example of an armiger. You know, she was definitely, you're going to understand why she comes back later on and why she's on his mind. But Raucho? But if I do build a theory around him, I just want him to mean more than what we've come up with so far. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I still wonder if he was Syriac's husband.
But that's not enough for me. So Severian says,
it was with Thea that I had first fallen in love, worshipping her because she belonged to the man I had saved. Thecla I had loved in the beginning because she recalled Thea. Now, as autumn dies and winter and spring and summer comes again, the end of the year as it is its beginning, I loved Thea once more because she recalled Thecla.
Yeah, it's all a great cycle. And in case I've never pointed this out on mic, Severian knew what Thea looked like that night, right down to her violet eyes, a color not quite blue and not quite black. But for Hildegren, who was closest, Severian bumped into him, after all, he could only recognize him by his voice. And that, among so many reasons, is why I've always thought Thea was a mystery. But I don't anymore. She's completely explained, except for Hathor's violet-eyed paraqueta with hands like Thea's voice, like doves, that is.
So what I think is also weird about that whole little passage where he talks about, like, not just who he loved first, but the way he describes why he loves everybody there is because they remind him of something else. Like that's it.
Where's the start?
Yeah, exactly. And it's an odd way to describe to me being in love with someone, because you're intentionally sort of making it weird and psychoanalytic almost by saying,
it's like a wedding ring.
Kind of. Yeah. I guess. But it's just this whole weird thing of, you're not ever just sort of fascinated by the one person in front of you, but it's because of some other thing that you want that reminds you of someone else.
Yeah.
But it's probably very right for Severian. Like, the more we think about this, he doesn't have any sort of innocent crushes on anyone except maybe Dorcas.
Yeah.
I don't know, but everyone else, it seems like he's sort of in love with them because they remind him of something, or because they had some passionate connection about something else that they were going through. But there's nothing sort of, especially the way he describes this, nothing seems very innocent about Severian's love.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, even Dorcas, he's bound to see something of his own face in Dorcas, right? So Severian always thinks he's being surreptitious when he's checking Thea out. Yeah, remember the false Thekla's comment at House Azure when he was checking out false Thea? She thought his eyes were going to roll out of his head. So now Vodalus says, "Oh, you're an admirer of women." And Severian looks down. He says, "I have been little in polite company, sir. Please forgive me." Vodalus says, "Oh, no. She's a good-looking woman. Nothing to forgive." He just hopes Severian wasn't admiring Thea's neck with professional interest, looking for the right place to cut it. Vodalus is still considering whether Severian could be a spy,
Yeah. Also, too, he's young, right? So there's got to be some kind of poking fun at him here of like, hey, you're a teenage kid.
And also a guy who cuts off heads for a living. So.
Right. But that whole thing about like, I see you're an admirer of women. It's like, well, what 17-year-old boy
isn't,
or just take the equivalent, whatever identification you are raging hormones no matter what.
Yeah. So anyway, Severian says, "Oh, never, I would never think about cutting off her head." And he says, "Well, great." And he picks up a platter of thrushes and he puts one on Severian's plate. And this is apparently a special honor. But Vodalus has the same prejudices of the torturers that Thekla had when they first met. He says, "Still, I own I am a trifle surprised. I would have thought that a man in your profession would look upon us poor human beings as much a butcher does on cattle." And at that, Severian counters, "Of that I cannot inform you, sir. I have not been bred a butcher." Ouch.
Yep. And it shows a couple things. It first of all shows, I think, that Vodalus doesn't know much about the inner workings of the autarky, which kind of goes against the
or at least the guild, right?
Or at least the guild. But I mean, yeah, I still got the sense that, even if they were sending Thekla there because she had been messing around with Vodalus, it still seems like it's pretty intentional. Like the autarch knows about it. Other people know about it.
Yeah. Even though the autarch says he didn't know anything about it.
Right. I know. Yeah. But
I don't believe him either.
Right. But it also means that Vodalus doesn't have his finger on the pulse of sort of the deep inner workings. Like I would think that Severian would kind of assume. And so when I read this time, it seems to me like one of the first, you were talking about tells before, but this is maybe one of the first times that Severian sees Vodalus become a little less sort of mythological, because you're like, oh, he doesn't know. So he does have his thing about the guild and the dignity, but it's also a tell that, this Vodalus isn't quite so omniscient as maybe I had thought he was.
Yeah. And incidentally, remember that one of the meanings of Madichin is butcher.
That's true. That is very true.
Yeah. Which suggests what other people think of them. And anyway, at this, Vodalus laughs. He finds Severian's personal dignity charming, maybe in a cute way, like a puppy barking at a mastiff. And he says, "A touch," which is actually just English for touche. And he says now that he's sorry that Severian has agreed to serve him, because now he can't hold him hostage and trade him for Barnock. And that would have meant that he could sit around with him and have interesting conversations, just like Severian did with Thekla.
Yeah, which there's a little bit of fun irony for you. That you're just one step away from being in the same kind of situation that Thekla was in with you.
Yeah.
And it seems like Severian doesn't comment on that, but at least he includes it. But yeah, that seems like you're definitely supposed to remember that the sort of very aware irony of that.
Right. And I suppose this means that Barnock has not been rescued. If he was ever executed, we don't know.
Right. And I had assumed that he was, like, because Severian has that moment where right after Morwenna, he's like, and I'm not going to go through all the other details here. I performed my other, from here on out, I just know that I did it. So I assumed that he did both executions at the same time.
Yeah.
I had thought, but
but they get abducted as soon as they walk in. I don't know. I guess it's possible that Severian says, "Okay, I got to go in. Let me chop off this guy's head. And now let's go have some breakfast after the long night."
Yeah, that's kind of how I had read it before, that he was sort of implying And then I also killed Barnock, but I'm not going to go into detail about it because I just told you about Morwenna. But we don't know. He's not clear about it.
Yeah, but they did plan. I mean, they planned to hold him as a ransom for Barnock, so he's got to be still back there. Now Severian learns that Vodalus has plans for him to leave tomorrow morning, and Vodalus says, "Yet I think I have an errand for you that will consort well with your own inclinations." And Severian replies, "If it's your errand, sir, it must consort well with my inclinations." And again, Vodalus likes this. He says, "You're wasted on the scaffold." But before Severian can serve him, he has to
understand something of the position of the pieces on the board and the goal of the game that we play. Call the sides white and black. And in honor of your garments, so that you shall know where your interests lie, we shall be black. No doubt you've been told that we blacks are mere bandits and traitors, but have you any notion of what it is we strive to do?
And Severian says, "To checkmate the autarch, sir."
That would be well enough, but it's only a step and not our final goal. You've come from the Citadel. I know you see something of your journeyings and history, that great fortress of bygone days, so you must possess some feeling for the past. Has it never struck you that mankind was richer by far, and happier too, a Chiliad gone than it is now?
Severian says, "Everyone knows that we have fallen far from the brave days of the past.
As it was then, so shall it be again."
And notice that Vodalus seems to know more of the actual history of the Citadel than Severian. I mean, it does seem that way.
That's true. That he knows more about the sort of bigger picture of the context. Yeah. So, and then we keep going with the cyclical talk here. As it was then, so shall it be again. Men of Earth, sailing between the stars, leaping from galaxy to galaxy, the masters of the daughters of the sun.
So Vodalus is campaigning against the policies of autarky that have deliberately turned its back on technological progress and presumably returning to the stars. So Vodalus is allied with the Megatherians, Abaya and Erebus, and with the Eskians who serve them in order to accomplish this. And we don't know what Ashia is like, but we gather from Severian's conversation with the autarch that they do not live in quasi-medieval technological culture like the Commonwealth. The autarch says, if you want progress, the Asians have it. So, I mean, it's tempting because of the Maoist Orwellian nature of their speech to think of them like China in the 1940s or North Korea. But, Craig, I think it might be more practical to think of them like Orwell's Oceania, or even something more advanced than that.
That's what I was wondering too. It's hard because when we actually see him, Severian talks about how they all look ill, but those are also the soldiers, right? I mean, those are the soldiers who've been out on the front. So it's hard to know if that's what a standard Ashian looks like, you know, just sort of lifeless and full of and weakened and whatnot. But yeah, the actual place itself may be a kind of, super hygienic kind of, I don't know, cold type of.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the Megatherians, particularly Erebus and Abaya, might be just pushing Eskia to its limits in order to defeat the Commonwealth before it's too late. But, if Vodalus thinks the Megatherians can break out of Earth to get to the stars and the galaxies, then I have to doubt that, because Askia isn't the base of a galactic empire. And I suppose that's the reason the heroes put the black hole in the sun, to lock Earth's humanity on the planet and to prevent them from continually colonizing other ships and sending warrior ships and soldiers. It's pointed out that there must be other humans on other planets, but it seems to me that they don't thrive there in numbers. That's the only way I get the goals that the autarch describes to match the methods that the heroes employed. And obviously, I don't think the heroes are merely liars, equivalent to the Megatherians in every way.
It's strange because I still don't really get Vodalus's role in this, right? Because I get the sense from when we actually talk to the old autarch that Vodalus is more of a pawn that they've set up, and this is a difference. As I was kind of reading through some older stuff, people couldn't really agree on whether Vodalus was someone who was completely manipulated, like by the old autarch and the House Absolute, or whether he was someone who was rebelling already and they just kind of were outsmarted him and took him over. Like, I had always gotten the sense that he was intentionally put there to be some kind of distraction or to be some kind of scapegoat for something else. But I know I could tell other people were definitely thinking that, maybe he really was someone who was, like you said, in league with the Megatherians, and who really did want to bring this kind of Ashen world around. But he's also, I mean, the only thing that makes me weirded out about that is that the Ashens are also sort of, I mean, they're thoroughly communal, and he's still talking about aristocracies, right? And I mean, Thea admitted is going to definitely, for her, it's all about basically being, getting back in power, or at least getting back in status. So that's where I was like, it doesn't seem to me, I'm still not really convinced that Vodalus really is part of some Megatherian scheme. He might be being used by him, but I still feel like he's just sort of arrogant pawn who got turned in. And I don't know if that's certain, because like I said, he still confuses the hell out of me. But
well, I think he is working for the Megatherians. But if you're going to have to face a revolution of traitors, why don't you set up a traitor that is actually being controlled by and manipulated by you in every way? So, he's taking all of his orders from the Megatherians. And we're going to see he doesn't want to offend them in any way. They're probably giving him weapons, but the Autarch doesn't seem to think that he's a great threat because he knows everything he's going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we'll figure that out, because that's one thing I'd like to do here is get clearer for myself on exactly how Vodalus is. Who's he working for exactly, and what's his awareness?
Right.
Things. Yeah. Because I'm still mushy with some stuff.
So now Thea, who was listening without showing any sign of it, stops eating, turns to Severian, and says, quote, in a sweet cooing voice,
"Do you know how our world was renamed, Torture? The Dawn Men went to Red Verthandi, who was then named War. And because they thought that had an ungracious sound that would keep others from following them, they renamed it, calling it Present. That was a jest in their tongue, for the same word meant now and the gift. Or so one of our tutors once explained the matter to my sister and me, though I do not see how any language could endure such confusion."
Yeah, so here we get a hint from the text that all this is happening in another language. Thea says, the Dawn Men, and that's the ancient people at the dawn of humanity who went and colonized Red Verthandi. And we got a hint earlier in chapter 35 in Hathor's rambling speech that Mars is called Verthandi in this culture. And this is the first time it's spelled out, or spelled out as much as Gene Wolfe is inclined to do.
Right.
So to Thea, Verthandi, or whatever word they use, means the gift. And they renamed Mars the gift, as in the present, because Verthandi means the present. Previously, it was a word that meant war, as Mars certainly does. Think of words like martial law, that is ruled by the military, or martial arts, which means the craft of warfare. Mars is, of course, the god of war. So, although to Thea, the name of Mars, Verthandi, means the gift or the present, and she assumes that Mars was renamed as a marketing maneuver, look, everybody, move to the gift planet. In fact, they named it Verthandi because it meant now. It's the planet that is the cutting edge. But in Thea's language, there's no word like the present that can also mean either a gift or the current moment. And Thea finds it crazy that anyone would have a language where one word can have more than one meaning. And I guess it could be that the Commonwealth language is some kind of hyper-rationally designed language, so that there are no words with double meanings. But, based on Vodalus's reaction, I think that is not the case. I think that Thea is someone without a lot of imagination. To her, whatever A means to her, that's what it means. And that's all it should ever mean. And it's not a favorable depiction of Thea. And I think if Severian had met Thecla, absent her travails among the torturers, she'd have been every bit as unimpressive, except for her potential for cruelty. And anyway, my point is that while Thea discourses on the naming of Mars, the naming process of Verthandi and how stupid it is to have a word that can mean the current moment as well as a gift, as if the current moment could ever be a gift. Vodalus listened to her as if he were impatient to speak himself, yet was too well-mannered to interrupt her. So Vodalus would like to interject, but he can't do so without being pedantic and calling Thea a dummy. So,
and I want to come back in a second to the names there. And I'm trying to remember now, did we talk about the Old Norse names?
I think we have talked about that they are the Norns, but let's go ahead and get to the other Norn, and then we'll be able to talk about that.
Okay.
So then the other folks, they go to Venus, and Mars is called, the now planet. Well, we're the future. We're Skuld, the future planet. And she says that's why Earth had its name changed to Earth, the world of the past. But actually, Earth or Erd or Weird doesn't mean the past. The names of the Norns meant present, future, and fate. And Thea is making an extrapolation about the meaning of the word based on the other two words, right?
Mm-hmm. And then it gets all confusing too, because with the Norns, that would seem to be in the logic of this, the Norn names would have lasted in the memory here, right? Mm-hmm. To know that they were, the three of them were there. But of course, for us, those are also, it's not like those are English words. Those are Old Norse names,
right,
for something else. So yeah, trying to trace exactly how the lineage of all these words, real and fake, gets a little confusing here.
Well, mostly, Wolfe just loves words.
Oh yeah.
But you can see how maybe when they colonized Mars, that they said, "Oh, yeah, okay, but we have to call it something. Let's call maybe the first colony was called, Verthandi, and how things go. Sometimes an entire country is named for the biggest city on it, and then maybe in answer to that, they really did name Venus, the largest city on Venus, or the first colony, Skuld, for the future. And the point is that Thea is making the wrong assumptions. She's got cause and effect all messed up.
I do like, though, that the way she has it set up, that the future is closer to the sun. Like that's pretty cool. Like it's, maybe, I don't know. It's just one little kind of image there. But yeah. In general, though, I think, the point is that she's trying to make these connections because of even things about language that she doesn't really quite understand or believe are real. Like the whole idea of a synonym of a homophone or a homonym is odd to her.
Right. And she picked all this up from her tutors with her and Thecla. But, I'm not sure how formal all of this education is. The exultant classes might well have more access to various and hard to get information than the average person, but they're, divining the past by the same incomplete and varying means that we use to comprehend the exposition of this particular novel. And we get a little Earthlist Reddit debate between Thea and Vodalus about the origin of Earth's name. He says,
"You are wrong in that, I fear. I have it on good authority that this world of ours has been called by that name from the utmost reaches of antiquity. Still, your error is so charming that I would rather have it that you are correct and I mistaken."
Oh, that's so condescending.
But she likes it. She smiles at him because she thinks, "Oh, he's being nice to me."
Yeah, we never have a response like that on the Earth list, I'll tell you. And Vodalus just resumes talking to Severian. He acknowledges that while Thea's tale might not have accurately explained why Earth is called as it is, it does point out that, quote, "in those times mankind traveled by his own ships from world to world and mastered each and built on them the cities of man. Those were the great days of our race when our fathers' strove for the mastery of the universe." I think there were probably more fathers than that, unless the exultants are all clones, in which case, maybe not.
Right. So one last thing, though, just on the naming conventions, it's also Wolfe. So we should be careful that whenever somebody says, "Yeah, that's probably wrong," of taking them at their word. And
that's true.
There may be some sense here that, in some ways too, Vodalus is wrong, because he's like, "No, I've heard it's called Earth forever, but obviously it's not always been called URTH." Right?
Yes, that's true.
a different name. So that sounds similar. So there's all kinds of layers there of how you could get things wrong. And that story, it's been bugging me because it seems like the kind of thing Wolfe would tell that isn't quite right, but is probably way more right than what Vodalus says.
Right. Yeah.
So her being wrong is going to be way more right. But yeah, I still haven't quite pieced together exactly how. And this is the only time we ever get discussion of colonizing different planets, right?
Well, there might be some in Syriaca, right?
She talks about the AIs going out and coming back, but she doesn't ever really talk about where they are or different planets. So yeah, that's the only thing. And the only reason I would say that is really because of thinking how colonizing different planets plays such an important role in the next 7 books that I would want to kind of come back to this and think about that. I don't think, I just got to admit, I don't believe at all that there's anything about blue and green hidden in this little back and forth right here. I don't think Wolfe was quite that developed.
No, I don't agree with that.
But still, something about planets, I don't know. I've got to come back to it because I still feel like there ought to be some, I feel like there's some other truth in what she's saying that is connected to the Norns somehow that I just haven't picked up on.
No.
And I couldn't find anything. This is the one thing I really spent a lot of time this week looking back through Earth and Reddit, trying to see if I could find anyone that have some good way to put this together to make it true. And I didn't find anything. So if anybody else has something or remembers, this would be one I definitely want to talk about.
Yeah. But, the way he talks, it does appear that some people do travel between worlds with the help of alien powers.
Yes. Yeah. That's not just a myth, that's actually his immediate goal. But also we've been talking about the ship and how Jonas has just been talking about traveling.
And Hathor has been on ships.
And then even just the word Caucagen, like I think it's pretty clear from the way that they talk about things that Caucagen means some kind of off-worlder. And I still don't know whether that's supposed to specifically mean alien or human from another place, but it definitely is meant to be someone from off-world. And we know too that the moon has been terraformed in some way or another, right? So we definitely have that. And they've even talked specifically about how the moon was changed and it wasn't always green. Right. So yeah, we've definitely had real people traveling to different planets and colonizing them. And he even mentions galaxies. So
yes.
I, again, don't know whether that's hyperbole, whether this is just something that's happened inside the solar system, but the way we know that Zadkiel's ship will work later on and the fact that they talk about different galaxies, I think that what they really mean is things way, way, way far away, not just the solar system. But that's always my sense of this world, that the solar system is just one place among countless other places in the universe, stars. Or at least that had been, or at least at one point, whether or not humanity still is that wide and still is that far around in this world, I don't know. But I think at one point, the implication is that, yes, there were definitely people living all over the place and not just in the solar system.
Well, Thea's going to explain that the Alzabo itself is a creature from another planet.
Exactly.
And that's probably not Mars. So,
yeah.
So at last, Vodalus stops talking and Severian, feeling the silence, says, "Sir, we are much diminished in wisdom from that age," and basically giving Vodalus a chance to continue to talk, which he no doubt enjoys.
Yeah, and he has a lot to say. Now you strike to the heart. Yet with all your perspicacity, which is perception and discernment, you mistake it. No, we are not diminished in wisdom. We are diminished in power. Study has advanced without let-up. But even as men have learned all that's needful for mastery, the strength of the world has been exhausted. We exist now, and precariously, upon the ruin of those who preceded us. While some skim the air in their flyers 10,000 leagues in a day, we others creep on the skin of the earth, unable to go from one horizon to the next before the westernmost has lifted itself to veil the sun. You spoke a moment ago of checkmating that mewling fool, the autarch. I want you to conceive now of 2 autarchs, 2 great powers striving for mastery. The white seeks to maintain things as they are, the black to set man's foot on the road to domination again. I call it the black by chance, but it would be well to remember that it is by night that we see the stars strongly. They are remote and all but invisible in the red light of day. Now, of those 2 powers, which would you serve?
And then in the silence, Severian says, "The black, surely."
And one little thing, but just about the sky metaphor there, there is kind of like a third option, and that's with the sun being bright again, which I know would still kind of like diminish the sky, but it would also, I mean, if as long as we're sticking with the metaphor, it would bring all the light of those stars right to Earth instead of having to go away.
Yeah, so, and also, you know, Vodalus his model, his plan is essentially that the Earth is done. We're done with the Earth. We need to get in our ships and take off and take over the galaxy elsewhere. He has no plan whether Earth is destroyed, and becomes ushes, or whether it just slowly creeps to a frozen ember and dies. That is irrelevant to him. Right?
Yep, I think so. And it's also, the word he uses here is domination. That what we need to do is set man's foot on the road to domination again. Right. And we've talked before, mastery and domination. Yeah. And we've talked before about maybe some of the connections to the Megatherians, but I mean, that idea of being the dominant creature over something else, that's precisely what the Megatherians want to do. And it's always wrapped up in taking power away from something else and sort of lording it over them. But there's not really much there about self-rule or like wise self-rule or anything that like that. It's more just, being the master in this sort of like somebody has to be master, and the current autarch is not a good master. And so it's going to be us. Yeah. Yeah.
And incidentally, this whole analogy of black and white chess pieces and the color not designating good or evil, but only to differentiate the pieces, is exactly the way number 5 describes Aunt Janine in The Fifth Head of Cerberus. Like a black queen chess piece because she's floating and missing legs. Not black for any judgmental reason, only to designate a difference from a white queen, a different person that number 5 says he'll never meet.
And here, though, I think especially with the foliage and cloaks and the torturers being the black one and Severian being black and bringing back the sun, that, there's definitely something in all this, too, of an irony here. I think that even though he says, yes, we're the black, and that means that, it's just because we're actually interested in the further away stars and whatnot.
Right.
But I think the irony is that, no, actually, we're going to get to a place where, Severian trades black for his
white Ariat path. Yeah.
Yes. At the end. And so here that would seem a little bit more like, a rhetorical move to make something seem better. Yeah.
Well, Vodalus is happy over Severian's answer anyway, but he warns Severian that, quote, as a man of sense, you must understand that the way to reconquest cannot be easy. Those who wish no change may sit hugging their scruples forever. We must do everything. We must dare everything. So Vodalus says that man isn't going to return to the stars by following their consciences. He's going to have to be willing to break a few eggs, to do some things that offend his conscience. And someone recently proposed the question of why the heroes want a human, the right human, who's justified and capable to decide whether to bring the new sun or not. And I think it could be argued that it's simple morality. They don't feel justified in making that choice, and so they look for a human who's willing to make that choice one way or the other, despite their preferred choice.
That is a bit more like that sort of self-governing thing rather than dominating over something else.
Right.
Like it's kind of like saying, this is pushing it too far maybe, but it's almost like saying that, we could just save you regardless, but we're going to make sure that you want to be saved and that you've earned it somehow or something like that. Yeah, there is something to that.
And everyone then starts to eat and chit-chat again. Severian, under his breath, reveals something to Vodalus that he did not reveal even to Jonas until this morning, that he has the claw of the Conciliator. He tells him for fear that Vodalus would think that he was, quote, faithless. Severian says, he was a better intriguer than I. Vodalus doesn't know what Severian will say, but he can tell it is something Severian does not think everyone else should know about. So Vodalus looks the opposite direction from Severian, or straight ahead, and just pretends to eat and says, what is it? Out with it. And Severian tells him. And I think Vodalus' reaction bears investigation because it reveals what Vodalus perceives as his team, and what you think about what he thought affects a lot of what you think of what's going on in the bigger picture of this story. He's not looking at Severian. He's looking straight ahead, but his eyes, when he tells him what he has, his eyes look over at him. And Severian offers to show it to him. And Vodalus says at first, no, not here. And then he says, no, better not at all. Severian no doubt assumes the clock would be a valuable talisman to unite his forces or ransom to the autarch for a huge sum of money. But Vodalus, I think he's right in his practicality about that. He tells Severian it's beyond value, which means it's worthless. Because, if Vodalus were to keep it, it could unite the Commonwealth against him. He'd stolen the claw. And if he tried to ransom it, same thing. But he doesn't instruct Severian to give it back either, or make a gesture of himself returning it. He tells Severian to hold on to it and then throw it in the pit. Yeah. And then he changes his appeal to Severian. All right, you and I are men of sense. Despite his words, there is a tinge of fear in his voice. But, the rabble believe it to be sacred, a performer of all manners of wonders. If I were to possess it, they would think me a desecrator and an enemy of the theologumenon. There's too many syllables in that word.
Yeah, it's a rough word.
And that's an interesting word, though. A theologumenon is that which is said about God or divine thing. So Vodalus is saying, I think, that if he were to possess the claw, the people would think he was a desecrator of God so-called. It's a highfalutin word, but it's a fancy way to denigrate theological talk.
Yeah, I think it'd be like if somebody, a non-believer would talk about the Almighty or something.
Right. Yeah. But, it's not just politics of the Commonwealth and, the regular people that he fears. Also, if he were to possess it, he thinks, quote, our masters would think me turned traitor. Okay, so Craig, that's interesting. It touches on either the way the Megatherians view Severian as a conciliator or the way Vodalus thinks they view him. And it's long been speculated that the Megatherians don't have anything to fear about the new sun. They won't be harmed in the flood. Okay, that's true. But they don't desire anything about the planet Earth either, any more than Vodalus does.
Right.
What is valuable about Earth is the human beings on it, the future generations as well, who will be born there. And if you ask, why do the Megatherians want to control humans? I'll ask you, why do you think anyone wants to be president of the United States? Yeah.
And that does, we just mentioned how he's talking about man as domination. And that's one reason why, I think too, this is the first total dead giveaway that Vodalus has that says he's in league with the Megatherians. Right. If I'm right, this is the one time we get the idea that yes, he is in league with, but there's no other person or creature or whatever that our masters could be.
Well, there was a hint in that Thecla herself had that Hydra bracelet.
Right.
But that's
the
it.
Hydra's right. And that's a deeply hidden hint. This is a straight on. This is pretty much straight up.
Not Hydra. What is it?
The Kraken.
The Kraken.
Was it
the
a
Kraken.
Yeah. And, but yeah, so this is a dead giveaway or just a straight up saying of it, I think. But yeah, you're right. So, and then cross that with how he just talked about man being the dominator, or the mastery.
Right.
That's really what's involved here is really sort of like power. It's again, a kind of having power over people.
Yeah.
I don't know. Even if Vodalus doesn't know that the idea of the new sun coming will cause a flood or something like that, the whole point, I think, is that whatever the Conciliator represents, they know that it represents something that's going to make it impossible for the Megatherians to win, whether it's literally getting rid of people or whether it's maybe having people be undominatable, like they're for whatever reason. Right. And so something about the Conciliator legend and the claw is opposed to it. So it's something that is sort of like the true other side. It seems like not the autarch, but something about the Conciliator, and Vodalus is sort of straight up saying that.
Yeah. And it's hard for me to imagine that Vodalus actually believes there's a new sun coming or the Conciliator or any of these wonders, which makes it interesting that he believes the Megatherians themselves care.
Right. But that's why I was saying it seems like for some reason this is like saying whatever it is about the Conciliator legend, that's what would make him think that they turned traitor. Right. And it's like, I don't know that there's any necessary. Once you read Earth of the New Sun, you can see that there's a connection between maybe the autarch whole process and the new sun. But at this point, there's no real sense at all that, the Autarch is maybe preparing for this or something. We don't know about the test really at this point or anything like that. So we don't know that. To us, it seems like, if you're reading this for the first time, this is saying the Conciliator is maybe the real enemy of the Megatherians, not the good Autarch or something like that. Whereas up to this point, it's been seeing as Autarch versus Vodalus, and Autarch maybe versus the Megatherians because of the war or whatever's going on.
Let me take a shot at trying to see the New Sun religion and the Conciliator and the Claw from the Megatherians' perspective, which I admit is still kind of, it's pretty occluded. So it seems that when most of humanity are destroyed, the planet would not be very valuable to them for a long time because there's so few people, because the people are so backwards. It's no difference than running, controlling the sea life under the ocean. So the people who would come after that might well be beyond their ability to tame, because Baldander says that's what they wanted. They didn't want to destroy humanity. They only wanted to tame them, which is to say they wanted to bend humanity to their own desires. And anyway, that's the way it seems to me. The green men who lack a need to tame nature in order to survive would be more difficult to tame themselves. Not to say that they would be above vices. Marubius says that the humans that made the animals, that made the heroes, were hardly nice guys. But the reset can only do the Megatherians harm.
At the very least, it'll delay things for millennia.
Sure. But in the Citadel of the Autarch tells Severian that in exchange for Severian, Abaya would give him all of Askia, all of Asia, however you choose to pronounce it. So given all these pieces, what would Abaya have done with Severian if he had him in his power? Vodalus probably assumes he would kill him if he believed in conciliators and miracles. But it doesn't seem to me that they would do that, or even that they could. They wanted to influence Severian in his decision when he went into Yesod. They wanted to convince him not to bring the new sun.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to the Claw. Why is it in the Megatherians' interest to care whether Vodalus is promoting the veneration of the Claw? Perhaps, let me try a first Severian solution and get it over with. There's another player on the field. The Claw is not directly associated with Severian at all. The Claw is a symbol of the first Severian's activity in the world. From his place, circumfused to the borders of Bria, because he's entered those mirrors, he'll act in all sorts of ways that are directly associated with the Claw, which is directly associated with the coming of the new sun. And that activity is contrary to them because it influences our Severian.
I can see that. I can see that.
I don't know. It's a stretch. It's stacked on many, many things, but still, I mean, I've gone all the way through this book several times. I've gone through Earth of the New Sun at least twice, all the way through. I don't really understand the Megatherians at all.
No, not exactly. And I think you have to assume a couple of things, whether or not there's the whole first Severian thing or not. The Megatherians know that Severian is gonna be important. Like maybe it's because they can walk the corridors of time too, and so they see that he's gonna be important. So yeah, I think the most likely thing is that they want to influence him, and then if they can get him on their side, then he can say, no, I don't want the new sun. Maybe instead what he could do is say, no, actually what I want to do is join the Megatherians and this whole Ashia route. Maybe that's really the best way that we should be doing things. So all of that seems to make a little more sense as for why they would want him, because he's gonna, whatever his destiny is, he's gonna be important in the future of humanity, and so they want to win him over to their side. I mean, I think that's why Juturna doesn't immediately just quash him, right? Like her whole thing is to try to seduce him, and she sticks with that for a long time, and she's never really about trying to destroy him, which you would think that if they just wanted to get rid of him, then they had a great shot, because Juturna could have just kept him under the water.
Well, look how many times Aegea comes in and comes so close to killing him with her assassins, just hiring the assassins around. Surely the Megatherians could hire plenty of assassins. If Jonas is a spy, they could instruct him to do it.
Yeah. But I just keep thinking back to that second chapter. And I mean, they had a chance to kill him then, and they very explicitly didn't. And it was all, then there's the things about the dreams and about coming down, and we'll teach you to breathe underwater, and we'll, give you all these other powers and things like that. So they're definitely trying to seduce him.
Right. Yeah, I think so. And then Vodalus, I think, intends to ask Severian how he got the claw. He says, "You must tell me," and then he's interrupted by a messenger. So Vodalus gets up a few steps away and listens. And Severian says he looks like a handsome schoolmaster with a boy. The messenger's head only comes up to Vodalus's shoulder. Eventually, the two of them walk away. Severian continues eating until it was only him, Jonas, and Thea at the table. And one other guy. We'll learn this guy's name is Chuniold, and he's Thea's servant.
And one other thing, too, just the fact that something happens and we don't really know what it is, but apparently whatever it is more important than the fact that Severian has the claw, which shows a lot. Like, even though we're all worried about this stuff, I think in the end, Vodalus just doesn't believe it. Like, otherwise, whatever sort of weird strategic thing they're working on, right? Like, even if it's just getting ready for the dinner tonight that they have to go worry about, it takes him away.
Yeah, it's just a mild complication.
Right. Whereas if this is actually was, and he believed in the Conciliator, and this is the single proof, which has all these mystical powers, you wouldn't just walk up away and go away because somebody's like, hey, one of the guards is drunk or something, or whatever's going on, right? So
and he's going to leave it to Severian to dispose of it.
Right.
Yeah, and maybe he won't. He doesn't know what Severian's going to do. It's not... He knows what he would prefer done, and he advises Severian, but he's not going to make sure he does it.
Right. Yeah. Apparently it's not, because it never comes up again, right? Even when he talks to him later and gives him the task, he just doesn't really mention it. Yeah.
So Thea says, "You're to join us, yet you do not know our ways." And perhaps she means that they've never participated in the satanic Eucharist feast, and she knows that they will tonight. Being willing to participate in it is a kind of test itself. Incidentally, when Thea and Vodalus eat Thecla, they're going to learn a lot about Severian from his time in the cell, and mostly it's going to encourage them about his loyalty to their cause.
I would think so. Although I do have questions about how much other people actually remember about this whole situation. And we can get there when we actually get to it, when Severian talks about it.
Well, they seem to think it's important. It's not just
right
type of ritual.
I get the sense that for them it's sort of a proof of loyalty, and it's a kind of literally a kind of bonding experience. Like, you all share in this feeling and experience, but they all talk about how quickly the actual memories fade, right? Like, it's one of the other guys, I think, when they're talking about it, are like, or was it the Cultilarii who are, who is it? I really am blanking now. There's some other conversation where somebody's talking about how, I can never.
He's going to be drowned.
Yeah, I'm going to drown. But then he's like, I can never quite remember exactly what I remembered or what I experienced in detail.
Well, apparently, Vodalus is doing it because for Severian to unite with Thecla, because Thecla's loyal, therefore it will influence Severian to be loyal.
Yeah, I think that could be it too.
But he says. And maybe this is, not true. He is a liar after all. But he gives the sense that in order to return to the stars, they're going to have all of this extra knowledge, and they can't be sidelined by their consciences. So they must be gleaning some kind of knowledge that they retain.
Yeah, and I don't know what that is, because it seems very weird. Like, this is an inefficient way to like have vague memories of other people's lives, and you have to go work really hard to get their people. And and honestly, Thecla is not the most important to the cause. I don't think. We find out that she played some super, super deep important role.
True.
Right.
Yeah. She was just sending letters. Of course, she had information at House Absolute that they didn't have.
Yeah. But so I don't know. That's one thing that I feel like really is left kind of vague. So I've always found myself trying to figure out if there's more of a kind of team building reason for it.
Yeah. I wonder,
I don't know.
I wonder if Vodalus's orders to kill Severian ultimately are related to anything he's learned by unifying with Thecla, or due to something Severian learned without knowing its significance.
That could be.
I don't have anything in the text to base that on.
Yeah,
It's probably not necessary. I mean, look how casual he is about the death of the followers that Severian slaughtered on the way in.
Yeah. And why he eventually has him killed doesn't make sense to me. I just don't understand.
Just because, he just feels like he's a wild card, I think.
I know. It just seems like in the end, that's just a complicated way to get rid of somebody. It's like he's going to send this letter to their man, but the main purpose of the letter seems to be kill this messenger.
No, I think he has some other information well. I don't know. I don't remember at the top of my head exactly what it is, but I think there was some other information, but we do find out that the last thing in the letter was to kill him.
Yeah.
And he's got to get someone to the House Absolute. Severian seems to be going to the House Absolute. He's a minister of the government. He's probably going to be allowed.
Yeah, that's true. All fair.
Thea then asks, do you need money? And Jonas is really practical and pipes right up. That's something that's always welcome, chatelaine, like the misfortunes of an older brother. That would be a sailor's joke. Mm. She says, shares will be set aside for you. From this day, we all take. When you return to us, they will be given to you. Meanwhile, I have a purse for each of you to speed you on your way.
That shares thing sounds very Robin Hoodish.
Yeah.
That just goes back to the Robin Hood and the Liege of Leaves kind of thing of like this mystique that he has. We're bandits out here, and so we all get a take.
Right.
But that also, that sort of having a take doesn't quite mesh with her ideas that she's going to talk about here in a second about being new royalty or something.
Well, this bunch is just rolling in cash, and let's face it, it's a very, communal situation that she's describing. Essentially, everyone has a financial incentive to stay loyal. Yeah. So it's a business model. Mm-hmm. Severian just picked up on what's going on. He said, wait, we're leaving? And she says, didn't he tell you were? Vodalus will tell you all about it at supper. And this strikes Severian as a lot of meals in one day. Remember, he's raised at the...
This is our anti-Hobbit moment.
Yeah. Well, he's raised at the mansion where they don't necessarily always get, 3 meals a day. But of course, Severian won't be exactly tucking in at the meal tonight. Thea plans her entire daily schedule around nursery rhymes. She says, there will be a supper tonight when the moon is bright. And then she adds, someone will be sent to fetch you. And then she quotes the rest of the verse. Dine at dawn to open your eyes. Dine at noon that you be strong. Dine at eve, then talk long. Dine at night if you be wise. Now that dine at night thing is a key because, what they're going to eat. And they're going to eat Thecla and then be wise.
They will get her mind, yeah.
And then she sends them with Chuniold to take their naps. Like they're 5-year-olds. Yeah. Of course, Severian hasn't slept in over 24 hours. So,
right. And this is a cool little part where they find this nice little spot by a brook, right? And it goes back to that thing I was saying about something about the forest being like rooms and having special areas and things, but it's also very pastoral. It's all very peaceful. And, it adds to this veneer that, Vodalus is going to preside over this wonderful world where there's kind of leisure everywhere and beautiful meals and,
and naps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
When Chuniold says, come with me, that's the first word he's spoken. But before he leaves, Severian tells Thea that he wants to talk to her more later. He says, I know something that concerns your schoolmate. Remember that Thecla once asked Severian that if he saw Thea again, he should tell Thea about her. And it's too late to do her any good now, but he's keeping his promise. Severian says, she saw that I was serious in what I said, and I saw that she had seen. So Severian and Thecla have a moment. In software security, this is called a handshake. She acknowledges, she gets what he's talking about. He acknowledges that he received her acknowledgement. So
this is one of those things too. This is total non sequitur, but in Dune, Frank Herbert has all the characters do this all the time. Like, I don't know how many times in Dune, it actually got irritating when I was reading like the fifth or sixth book, where every character will like look at someone else and I knew that they were thinking what I was thinking. And therefore they were thinking something else that they had to hide what they were thinking, but I knew what they were. Yeah. That kind of thing always drives me nuts. But Frank Herbert did that
smart
so
routine.
much. Oh yeah. But Herbert does that so often in Dune, it gets silly after that.
So then they follow Chuniold through the forest for about an hour. There's a lot of walking. And they finally arrive at a grassy bank beside a stream where they're told to wait and sleep if they can.
And why an hour away? Like that's another thing I don't quite like why so far away?
Well, they may be sequestering them.
Yeah.
So that, they're not considered 100% loyal. They're not actually fully in the group yet.
Yeah.
They don't want them listening in on stuff.
Yeah. That makes most sense.
Yeah. So they finally arrive at a grassy bank beside a stream where they're told to wait and sleep if they can, that someone will come for them after dark. Then Severian asks indirectly if they're prisoners. He says, "Oh, what if we were to leave?" And Chuniold says, "There are those all through this wood who would know our liege's will concerning you." In other words, the woods are full of hidden guards, and if he tries to escape, he'll be killed. If he chooses to stay, he can think of himself as a guest. If he tries to leave, he'll be treated as a prisoner. Vodalus' camp holds the illusion of freedom, but only an illusion. So Vodalus constantly talks about them having masters, not allies, and of the people in his camp serving him. Now, Severian fills Jonas in on what happened with Vodalus in the necropolis. He says that he told Jonas everything that he's written. I don't know if he told him explicitly that he killed a volunteer, but I'm sure Jonas could divine that. Jonas says, "I see why you will join this Vodalus. You must realize that I am your friend, not his. What I desire is to find the woman you call Jalinta." In other words, you can join Vodalus if you want, but loyalty to Vodalus is not my character's motivation. And then he gives us a motivation dump on Severian.
Yeah, and all of this is good. But he says, "You want to serve Vodalus, and to go to Thrax and begin a new life in exile, and to wipe out the stain you say you've made on the honor of your guild, though I confess I don't understand how such a thing can be stained, and to find the woman called Dorcas, and to make peace with the woman called Asia, while returning something we both know of to the women called Pellarines."
By the time he finishes this iteration of Severian's plans, it's become a joke. Jonas is smiling and Severian is laughing. It's kind of like explaining Severian's trip to get the Avern for the duel. "Let's go to the Botanic Garden, but first destroy the Pellarines Cathedral and steal the claw, and then get Chant caught in the Sand Garden and wander through the jungle and talk to Grandpa and resurrect Grandma and reconnect with Hildegren."
Yeah, and then this is the good part. And he says, "And though you remind me of the old man's kestrel that sat on a perch for 20 years and then flew off in all directions, I hope you achieve these things. But I trust you realize that it is possible, just barely possible perhaps, but possible, that one or two of them may get in the way of 4 or 5 of the others."
Which does happen.
Yes.
And Severian will do all those things, and most of them will get interrupted by several new agendas that he adds to himself. And then Severian says, "What you're saying is very true. I'm striving to do all those things, and although you might doubt it, I am giving all my strength and as much of my attention as I can to all of them. But it's true, things aren't going as well as I wanted. My divided ambitions have landed me in no better place than the shade of this tree, where I am a homeless wanderer. While you, with your single-minded pursuit of one all-powerful objective, look where you are." In other words, your method has left you no better than me.
Yep, which is cool. I like that. So, because it starts off too, it's kind of a little bit of a joke about, I feel like Wolfe saying, "I've made this incredibly complicated thing here." but then even the simple-minded guy is there with him. Yeah.
And this brings to mind again that Jonas's goal before he met Severian and Jalinta is still murky as well. Maybe he's a spy for Abaya. Maybe that's why he attached himself to Severian, or maybe, and the text is more supportive of this. He's following Severian because he'll need him to gain access to Jolenta's company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's late afternoon now, and they talk for a few hours.
And Severian says, birds twittered overhead, and it was very pleasant to have such a friend as Jonas, loyal, reasonable, tactful, and filled with wisdom, humor, and prudence. At that time, I had no hint of his history.
The implication is that Severian now feels like he understands much more of it.
Yeah, he says, at that time, I had no hint of his history, but I sensed that he was being less than candid about his background, and I sought, without venturing direct questions, to draw him out.
Now, Jonas is being cagey about his history, which suggests he's not some total amnesiac, even though he'll understand more when they get to the antechamber. I suppose Jonas knows he's a robot, or does to some degree. He could be hiding that. Maybe the two sides are only vaguely aware of each other.
Yeah.
He could be hiding who he's been working for recently. He's cagey, and it's not obvious ever why he's being cagey, at least not to me.
Right. And that even came up when they were talking before. Like, I'm still not sure why he was so cagey about answering Severian's questions.
Right.
I still just can't figure out exactly if Jonas knows what he is, or if he only has hints of what he is, or if he just doesn't want to admit to himself what he is. All those things could be possible, but I don't know which one is right.
Right. In this conversation, Severian says, I learned, or rather, I thought I did, that his father had been a craftsman. So by this, we understand that this is the conclusion Severian draws from their conversation, but he now knows it's not exactly true. His father, that is his maker, was, I guess, a robotics designer.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's another one of those Wolfian kinds of statements, which could mean many things. Yeah.
And heck, maybe the human parts of him were. His father was a craftsman. Who knows? And that he had been raised by both parents in what he called the usual way, though it is, in fact, rather rare. And that his home had been a seacoast town in the south, but that when he last visited it, he found it so much changed that he had no desire to remain. Okay, I do think this is Jonas merging his past with his human side, who perhaps is Miles. And I do think that somehow Jonas's human parts are Miles, though it's not clear to me how that can be. So Miles, or let's just say the human donor of his parts, they were raised on a southern town on the coast. And at the time, it was actually fairly rare to grow up in a home with your biological parents, or perhaps where Jonas's robot side came from, it's rare at that time, because this is, from Earth's interstellar travel period, right? It must be because they've gotten lost between stars. And we know that Typhon was born from a vat, not birthed by a mother and father. After the crash, Jonas returned to the town where his human donor grew up, but it was many thousands of years later, and the town held no appeal for either of them. That's the way I read it. Obviously, it's not the only possible way, I suppose.
Yeah. And the timeline, too, is confusing. I don't know, was there a crash in the recent past and he was fixed with human parts in the recent past? Or did that happen a long time ago and he's still been traveling further? It could be that, the human donor or donor in quotes, but, whoever the human side of him is, were they from the far past, but he's still been traveling as this dual person?
Perhaps,
I just don't know.
Perhaps he's a robot. They had a crash. There was a navigator, right? There's Kim Lee Song, which I gather seems to have been part of his crew. So they're from a long time. Perhaps Jonas's robot side was, an automaton or a robot on the ship, and his human part was one of the crew.
Yep, that could well be it too. Yeah. It's just never clear.
Yeah. Well, now Severian is looking at him. He thinks he's about 30 years old from the looks of him, but from this conversation and earlier ones that at this time of the story, he concluded that he had to be a little older than that. So Severian probably is figuring 40 years old. He thinks
Right.
this because, Jonas seems to have a lot of historical knowledge about the Commonwealth and Earth culture. So he figures he's well read in chronicles about past times. He says, quote, I was still too naive and unlettered myself, despite the attention Master Palamon and Thecla had given my mind, to think that anyone much below middle age could be so well read. Severian said that Jonas, quote, had a slightly cynical detachment from mankind that suggested he had seen a great deal of the world. Well, all those things are believable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Of course, this is because Jonas doesn't strictly consider himself part of mankind. Certainly not the mankind that he shares the world with today. So after they've talked a long time, Thea returns. So they both stop talking and watch her approach. She hasn't seen them yet. Remember, they got dropped off by Chuniold alone, and she didn't go there. Apparently, Chuniold has told her where to find them, and Severian says she was coming toward us without having seen us, so that she moved in the blind way people do who are merely following directions. At times, a shaft of sunlight fell on her face, which, if it chanced to be in profile, suggested Thecla's so strongly that the sight of it seemed to tear at my chest. All right, a couple things. If we're strictly following the clues of shafts of light designating a family member, then there's another clue. I realize it's usually more complicated than that. Here we have an inversion from the usual. In the past, Severian would look at Thecla and detect a resemblance of Thea, and it would provoke a very, very strong sexual reaction. Now he looks at Thea and sees Thecla, and it has a similar response, or at least maybe a more emotional one. Although, potentially not the same. He notes that Thea walks like Thecla too. He says it's like the proud Phorusrhacos stalk that should never have been caged. A Phorusrhacos is a huge flightless bird with a large hooked beak that inhabited Argentina 25 to 13 million years ago. It was 8 feet tall, 2.5 meters. So Severian is saying Thea and Thecla walk like giant birds, but in a proud, dignified way. He also seems to be saying that in Severian's time, Phorusrhacoses are frequently kept as caged pets.
Yeah.
And he draws the analogy that Thecla, and maybe inferentially Thea, being in a cell was also inappropriate to their wildness and grace. So Severian says that Thea and Thecla's family, quote, must be a truly ancient family. Look at her, like a dryad. It might be a willow walking. And Jonas responds, well, those ancient families are the newest of all. In ancient times, there was nothing like them. And this is, for a lot of people, a confirmation that the exaltants and exaltant culture are transplants from other planets, maybe Mars or Venus or even further afield. Severian doesn't think Thea was close enough to know what they were saying, but she does seem to have detected Jonas's voice. And so she looks at them and moves toward them at a faster pace. She doesn't run, but she moves very fast because of her long legs. They stand, she comes, and she puts her scarf on the ground and sits on it, looking at the water, the brook. Severian doesn't say he and Jonas sat down, but I think it's implied. He says, when they're all sitting, she's not much taller than they are. So exaltant's height must be primarily, but not only, in the lengthening of their legs.
That's what it seems like, yeah.
So she gets right to it. You said you had something to tell me about my sister? And Severian said, I was her last friend. She told me they would try to make you persuade Vodalus to give himself up to save her. Did you know she was imprisoned? And Thea looks over at Severian and assumes that he must have been some kind of servant to Thecla in her last days. And she says, yes, I heard they took her to that horrible place in the slums of Nessus, where I understand she died very quickly. So it's not clear where Thea is getting her information. Since Thecla was supposed to die slowly by the revolutionary, I'm sure the masters wouldn't formally announce the details of her death. The Autarch does have informants in the tower. I'm pretty sure Rosha is one of them. So maybe Vodalus got this much information from the Autarch, who he considers his spy. Severian thinks about how long it took to see the blood trickling under the door. He doesn't seem to think it was all that fast, but he nods anyway. Severian recounts the details of how Thecla was arrested from what she told him. And Thea says that she's been missing her life at House Absolute. But after hearing about people abducting Thecla in the tapestry, rolling her up and taking her off, she says, that's so very characteristic, and it reminds her of why she left. Severian tells her that Thecla missed the court too sometimes. I bet she did, frankly. She certainly talked a lot about it, he says. But Severian says that she told him that if she ever got out of the tower, she'd never go back to House Absolute. She talked about, quote, the country house from which she took her title, which suggests, I guess, that every chatelaine is the mistress of a country house somewhere. Thecla told Severian that she would, quote, refurnish it and give dinners there for the leading persons of the region and hunt. And Thecla has a different opinion about rural life and camping out. She says, I've had enough of hunting for 10 lifetimes. Yeah. But when Vodalus is autarch, I will be his consort. Then I shall walk beside the well of orchids again, this time with the daughters of 50 exultants in my train to amuse me with their singing. So Thea definitely dreams of going back to House Absolute. She imagines, I suppose, that there won't be all that constant intriguing the way it is now, or at least she'll never have to worry about being on the wrong side of an intrigue.
Seems like it too. And also this is, I think, one of the real giveaways that, at least for her, there's no real big revolutionary thing that Vodalus is going to bring about, right? It's like, no, we're just going to be the new autarch.
Right. They're not going to change society. They're just going to be more of what she grew up with. Right.
But it's now that she's going to be the one in charge. And so that's where it really seems pretty conservative compared to any kind of change. Yeah, that there's not going to, for her, it's just the same old thing. And that probably that's what Vodalus maybe has promised her. I don't know. But I'm not sure. Like I can't tell exactly if that's supposed to say that when you get down to it, Vodalus kind of thinks the same thing, and that's what he actually plans with her, or if Thea is just presented as she doesn't really get the scope of what Vodalus is saying, or at least, or even of what whether or not he believes it. She's not really playing along very well. It doesn't seem like it. She's not pulling the line of going to the stars and mastering things and great changes for her.
Well,
it's just
as long as she's in charge, what does she care? We'll do it anywhere. Yeah. I remember that Thecla said that an oracle had said she would one day sit on the throne, and that Thea had always envied her for that.
Yeah.
But anyway, Thea assumes all of that is just a few months away, so she figures she can put up with it until then. That's an interesting perspective. Thea does not come off as being particularly practical or an insightful person about the world and her place in it.
No.
I don't think we're expected to have a high opinion of her, and I don't think Severian ever thinks much of her at all after this meeting. But then again, we'll learn more about the way Thecla was before her imprisonment, and I doubt Severian would have had a very high opinion of her absent that experience.
Right. Yep.
With that, Thea gets up, gestures for Severian and Jonas to remain seated. I was happy to hear something now of my half-sister. That house you spoke of is mine now, though I can't reclaim it. So there are no more siblings in Thea and Thecla's family to inherit Thecla's house. She's the last of their line, unless I'm right, and there are replacement
other clones
to take their place when Thea dies. I don't think we know what happens to Thea after Agia takes over. I can't think of it at the moment if we do.
Yeah, I don't remember her having any role after. Yeah.
So Thea decides that as a thank you, give him a heads up about what will happen at supper tonight. She frames this as a warning. She knows that Vodalus hinted about it when he says, we're going to have to put away our scruples and such. But Severian just didn't seem to pick up on it. She says, if we and our allies and masters who wait in countries beneath the tides, she's talking about Abaya and the others. Notice she speaks of the undersea regions as merely other countries that happen to be under miles of ocean water.
Yeah.
If we and our allies and masters are to triumph, we must absorb all that can be learned of the past. And then she broaches the subject of the analeptic alzabo. Severian doesn't know about that. He does, but not the technical name for it. But he has heard stories about the alzabo animal. Severian gives a similar definition for it that Wolfe gave himself in Castle the Otter. And as I noted in Chapter 3, episode of Claw, I can't find a literary association for this story. And the legends of the alzabo or hyena or any of its many alternate names. Severian has heard it. He says, the alzabo comes by night to a house where a child has died and cries to be let in. And that's technically true, but there are details that Severian is not aware of. He doesn't realize how the alzabo subsumes the personality of a person and eats it, and how it's used by grave robbers that he and Master Olton had already discussed. And for a first-time reader, they don't know where this is going either. So Thea gives us background on the alzabo.
Right.
That animal was brought from the stars long ago, as were many other things for the benefit of Earth. It is a beast having no more intelligence than a dog, and perhaps less. But it is a devourer of carrion and a clawer at graves. And when it is fed upon human flesh, it knows, at least for a time, the speech and ways of human beings. The analeptic alzabo is prepared from a gland at the base of the animal skull. Do you understand me? And then she leaves, and Severian and Jonas can't look at each other because now they do understand what's going to be served at supper. Mm-hmm.
And one little thing I like that is that he said that it's a claw at graves.
That's true, yeah.
And just a fun little play there because the claw
more
also
resurrect. Everybody's resurrecting from graves
and bring things back as well. Just fun little tiny play that can go right past you.
Oh, wait a minute. Didn't Hilgren say, they'll be
With
honest like a
claws.
pack of doles? I don't know. Maybe. Jonas is thinking, Severian, you have some messed up friends. It's like when you're telling all your friends about this really cool guy who's coming to visit that you knew in high school, and then he shows up and it turns out he's just a complete wackadoodle as an adult, and your friends are saying, what kind of guy were you in high school?
Never mind, Jonas is a guy who forgot he's a robot or a mix or whatever. Yeah.
Right. He's got his own problems. Well, I'm also curious about what sort of purpose it was that the alzabo was brought to Earth for.
Because she mentions it as well as many other things that were useful for mankind. Yeah.
Maybe it was some kind of psychological analysis, maybe for studies. I'd imagine it was from a planet that had no sentient creatures. Its ability helped it find more food. I guess so. It's only when humans encountered it that its downsides and upsides became apparent.
Yeah.
So we got a little window into Earth's deep history and on Jonas. Do you have anything else to say before we close this?
I've still got so many questions. Like this one, to be honest, leaves me with more questions than answers. I mean, we've had little things that give us some insight into pieces here and there, but I feel like more than answering anything, it just gives us some more contour of the questions for the most part. I mean, the one thing I think I am more solid on this time now is Vodalus's relationship to the Megatherians. Like, I even think I said last time, like Vodalus is still just a huge question mark to me, but I feel like there are little things in here maybe I'd just forgotten that really do connect him to the Megatherians more than I had really realized.
Oh, yeah. He calls them his masters.
Yeah, his masters. Yeah. So I feel like I'll have a little bit better version of Vodalus. And the question now I have is to what extent the Autarch and Inire were playing him if he's also from the Megatherians or being used by the Megatherians. But yeah, mostly then as far as all the background on Jonas and on the alzabo and all this, no, I still, Jonas is yet another one of those big black holes to me in terms, I love him. I mean, he's such a cool guy, I feel like, but I don't know. I still have not pieced together his backstory as well as I'd like.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, so we get a little window into Earth's deep history and Jonas and the puzzles about them all. Do you have any better interpretations than what we've laid out here? I certainly hope that you'll reach out to us with your ideas and other comments and thoughts and corrections and complaints, and that you'll bring them to us on the Facebook group, the subreddit, Twitter, email, or the Patreon site. You can find out how to do all that in the show notes. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your wolf reading friends. And until you hear from us next, may the Moira favor you.
See everyone at supper.
Well, I'd like to visit the moon on a rocket ship high in the air. Yes, I'd like to visit the moon, but I don't think I'd like to live there. Though I'd like to look down at the earth from above, I would miss all the places and people I love. So although I might like it for one afternoon, I don't want to live on the moon. I'd like to travel under the sea and visit all the fish everywhere. Yes, I travel under the sea, but I don't think I'd like to live there. I might stay for a day there if I had my wish, but there's not much to do when your friends are all fish, and an oyster and clam aren't real family, so I don't want to live in the sea. I like to visit the jungle, hear the lions roar, go back in time and meet a dinosaur. There's so many strange places I'd like to be, but none of them permanently. 'Cause I don't want to live on the moon. No, I don't want to live on the moon.
I'm grabbing this roughly because I didn't write it down. Hold it. Of the theologumen. Try again. Of the theologumenon. I could even tell on myself. I gotta pump it up, man. I'm moving a little slow. You've lost your glibness.
Yeah, I know. It'll come back.